So here we are, Outkick Bourbon Tour, poured by Buffalo Trace. And Clay, we're enjoying some bourbon, which
That's
is
right.
Terrific. Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers
I've
to
got
you.
a cheers to everyone out there watching, everyone here as well. I hope wherever you're watching, you're having a fantastic Buffalo Trace experience. And I hope you enjoy this because we got the opportunity to go up in May and tour the entire facility. And I like to think of the way that they produce their product as being a staple of a long-term consistency, right? And one of the things, despite what people might say about me, I think if you go back and look at some of the things that I've said over the last 10 or 15 or 20 years, there's a stability to the arguments that I've made, just like there's a stability to the product that they produce. And I think about it almost in the context of judges, right? Judges have to stack opinions and they have to be good year after year in order to develop a good body of work. And a bourbon is the exact same way, right? You got to stack a bunch of them together.
And you wrote Dixieland Delight
15 years ago.
There's something about bourbon that sort of tastes like the South in a lot of ways. We're here doing this college football tour, going to SEC games. We're here at the cocktail party. Oh, by the way, it's the cocktail party.
Yes.
No matter what anyone says about it being the world's largest tailgate party.
Yeah, right.
It is the world's largest cocktail party. Outdoor cocktail party. And it'll stay that way. But there's something that tastes like the SEC with bourbon. And
I
Buffalo
don't
Trace.
think there's any doubt. I mean, in the same way that that you can think back, and as you get older, all the games seem to run together. I've got kids, and I was just at the World Series, and my 11-year-old can remember everything about the last 3 or 4 years of Atlanta Braves baseball. Every game, every player, every detail. And that's because he doesn't have a ton of games that like get stuck in his head. I mean, we're sitting here within sight distance of the Florida-Georgia field, and I just saw Tim Tebow last weekend, and it's crazy to me that it's been 10, 12, 14 years since Tebow was on the field. Because to me, I think back and I'm like, oh, it just seems like last year that I was here watching Tebow play against Mark Richt in Georgia, and you had Urban Meyer on the sideline and all those things. And I think what it gets at is there's a timelessness to college football in particular. And I think one reason that is, for many of us, you start off as a kid, and then you age into a college-age kid, and then you maybe get married, have your own kids, and become a dad, an uncle, and then you start to move that transition into being an older adult, maybe becoming a grandfather yourself. And so you can see that evolution. In the same way that bourbon feels timeless, a college football Saturday feels timeless. And I think to a large extent it's because you're the kid throwing the football when you're 5 or 6 years old with your parents, then you become the dad, then you become the granddad, and the stadium is the same, and the passion is the same, and the colors are the same, the pomp, the circumstance, the pageantry. But there's something that makes you feel still like you're a kid at heart, even when you are 80 years old. And I think that's what is so evocative about college football in particular, is it's for 6-year-olds to 86-year-olds. There's something that connects with you and makes you feel something in common. There's a familiarity and a family angle to it.
What's amazing about it, Clay, is you talked about your 11-year-old knowing everything about the Atlanta Braves. We're Tennessee Vols fans. I can think about me being 11 and remembering everything about the 1993, 94, 95, 96 season. So that part of it, that part of your childhood stays with you, right? You remember everything then. Then you become an adult and you have kids and responsibility and life happens, and all of a sudden you don't remember games as much. You don't remember seasons. And I think it also coincides with whether or not your team is winning, how much you're going to remember about it. But it's amazing that you can always kind of carry that piece of your childhood with you, and you see that now with your 11-year-old.
Well, you see it through their eyes. And we were staying late night. So we went to game 1 and 2 of the Braves against the Astros series. You might be watching this in 4 years. This is 2021. Good conversations to me are timeless, just like good bourbons are timeless in many ways. And we came back to the hotel where the Braves were staying in our hotel. And my kid got to get his picture taken with all these different players. And we're up to all hours, right? So he got to see what a dad lifestyle is like, and it's sometimes hectic, and there's alcohol involved, and you don't sleep very much. And by the way, he got back home, and he was too tired to go to school. So he went straight to bed, which is also, he's preparing.
You didn't get to be too tired to
host
your show today?
Dad had to keep working. But one of the things that was interesting was they were like, Dad, this is the best day ever. And then they said, hey, can we get in the pool? And so I had them in the pool at like 12:30 at night, right? Like getting to swim late night after the World Series. If you're a kid and you remember how awesome it was to stay at a hotel with a pool, right? Like if you're old, if you remember traveling, you're like, hey, did they have a pool? I want to go swimming. So they're in there and they're swimming around. I was like, they're 11 years old. And I said, you guys are going to remember the details of this trip incredibly well at 11, way better than you would remember it when you're 31 or 41 or 51. Because I do think when you're 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, that's the wheelhouse of fandom. That's the best time to be a sports fan. And one of the best things about being a dad, and I would imagine a mom if you're a sports fan as well, is getting, after you've been jaded, I'm 42, and you're a little bit more cynical, you get to see it through their eyes. And so you get to appreciate and reimagine that experience that you had as a profound sports fan, and you see it again through their eyes, and it's just that much more fun. So he's brought me back into being a baseball fan, my 11-year-old, in a way that I never would have been if I didn't have kids.
This is going to be very strange for people watching in 2028 asking, why is the governor of Tennessee hosting an event for Buffalo Trace? I just thought about the time warp Clay was talking about. We're going to get there and say, why is Governor Travis sitting here talking about bourbon and football and childhood memories?
Open election in 26, so I've already done my math.
I thought Chad was in jail.
This is the disgraced Chad Withrow that's hosting this event? Wow, it's a weird world. He was free in 2021. Also free, the SEC, and the borders are open and free. And I've talked to some of the guys from Buffalo Trace here tonight about Oklahoma and Texas joining the conference. Clay, in 2012, I feel like we had the same discussion. It just doesn't feel right that A&M and Missouri are in the SEC. That's those are Big 12 schools, right? This is the old Southwest Conference with A&M. What do you think ultimately? We know it's all about money, but in practicality, what do you think about Oklahoma and Texas as SEC schools?
I think they're going to be fabulous. And I know we've been talking about the past here, and it's going to sound funny, but I tend to be somebody who doesn't worry too much about what's past because I can't control any of it. And I tend to think that people evolve quickly. And what I mean by that is when Johnny Manziel went on the road and Texas A&M beat Alabama, and he ended up winning the Heisman Trophy, that season and that win alone introduced A&M in a big way to the SEC. And so I think Texas is going to fit fabulously well in the SEC. I think the Texas A&M rivalry is going to be an absolutely transcendent returned rivalry in college football. And I always think about culture. Are people good fits? And the culture of Oklahoma and the culture of Texas, I believe, in their obsession with football, is going to fit the culture of the SEC really well. And I think you also have to think about it in the context of the expansion to 12 for college football playoff. So in the same way that the NCAA tournament has basically turned college basketball into a one-month season, most people care about college basketball from late February to late March into early April. It's a 5-week season or so. I think when the college football playoff expands to 12, it's going to make college football that much more significant because right now we're sitting around, there's 4 or 5, 6 teams that feel like they have a chance to make the playoff. We go to 12, there's going to be 30 teams when November starts that they can get out their schedule, the fans can, and they can say, well, you know, if we manage to do this or that. And I think there's going to be 4 or 5 different SEC programs in a 12-team college football playoff every year. And so within that context, when you're talking about 16 and a quarter of the conference goes into the playoff every year, I think it's going to be really, really great. Now, I do think you worry a little bit about the devaluation of the regular season. For instance, this year, Alabama, let's say they beat Georgia in the SEC championship game. Well, they're probably going to play again, would be my expectation based on looking at the overall trajectory of the season. But I think the benefit that college football has is you only get 12 teams to watch your team, 12 times to watch your team. And so people out there are like, the regular season's never going to matter. Well, I don't know about you guys, but when you're a big college football fan and you only get 12 opportunities guaranteed to watch your team, that's 40 weeks a year where you don't get to watch a game. You don't get to watch a team. College football has the shortest season of any major sport. NBA never ends. NHL never ends. Major League Baseball, it feels like it never ends. All of these sports, college football is the shortest. So I think expanding to 12, I think adding Oklahoma and Texas, I think it's going to make college football stronger and the SEC better.
So much of college football to me is different from other sports because other sports tend to trend to the top. And what I mean by that is we pay attention to what the top teams and leagues will do. And that defines the weekend, or that defines the week. Baseball, NBA, NFL at times. But college football has a way of, you could be the 30th biggest game of the week, but when it's your team, especially in the SEC, and your team plays poorly or loses, that defines your week as a fan, right? It's not always thinking about, well, this was what happened in the big game of the week. It's also what happened to your team. And I think those allegiances still matter and can affect people throughout the week and sometimes throughout the season with that.
Well, I think college football is hyper-regional. And in a world where does it really matter who, like, people aren't like, oh, you know, the NFC West, it's really a big deal. Like, I don't buy into rivalries very often in pro sports because I think they're somewhat manufactured because they don't have the same level of passion as a big-time college football rivalry, in my opinion. Because, yeah, let's say you're an Alabama or Auburn person. You interact with everybody in that group all year long. And so that one day you define who's the king of the state. And college football uniquely, it seems to me, and college athletics in general, you have these beautifully internecine Civil War conflicts that provoke such incredible passion. And yeah, look, there are many rivalries where you can legitimately throw the record books out and it truly doesn't matter, but it is a desperate struggle inside of that state. And that's what I think is so beautiful and incredibly captivating about college football.
Clay, we're sitting here having bourbons with Buffalo Trace. If you could have bourbon with any figure in college football right now, past, present, head coach, someone you want to sit down with and have some rounds and talk, not even ball, could be anything, who's the person you're sitting down with?
So I'm in an incredibly fortunate spot where I get to meet some of these people now that I grew up getting to watch, and it can feel surreal. It can feel not as if it's a legitimate spot. So, for instance, right now I've got Tim Tebow's Heisman Trophy in my house. Tebow auctions off his Heisman Trophy for charity every year. You get to keep it for a year, and this year we bought it, and so. We have the Heisman Trophy.
This is the greatest, not even humble flex, but just flex of all time. Is Clay bringing up that he has the.
For the Gator fans, we love it.
It's amazing.
I might have to get.
It was not.
It's all for charity, so it's great, but still, just terrific.
It was not cheap, but I was talking about watching Tebow play in the cocktail party because we're in Jacksonville here for the Buffalo Trace event, and so the Heisman Trophy, Tebow's Heisman Trophy, is in my house. Like, we're having a Halloween party tomorrow, and the Tebow Heisman has like a cobweb on it. You know, my wife has like set up all the Halloween things. And the reason why I bring that up is, you know, we talked to Steve Spurrier on the show this year. A couple of hours ago, I just had Herschel Walker, and we recorded with him for a second time an interview. Danny Werfel is going to be on the show with me tomorrow, legendary Florida Gator quarterback. And so the guy that I would want to drink Buffalo Trace with is a guy I've actually had Buffalo Trace with, but I think he's one of the most captivating and incredible storytellers in the world of sports, and he's really funny, is Barkley, Charles Barkley. Charles Barkley is a big drinker. He is an awesome dude.
Big gambler.
Just great storyteller. And the people that I like to spend time with the most would be people who kind of can cross universes. Like, it's one thing if you're a great athlete, it's another thing if you're a great media person, politician, whatever you can do. But guys like Barkley who kind of cross paths, cross platforms, would be probably my answer in the world of sports. I would, if I could pick anybody to be here with us right now, just having drinks and telling stories, it would probably be Charles Barkley.
Speaking of drinks with Buffalo Trace, did Jill just get us more drinks? I saw that as a corner of my eye. Wow.
There you go.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jill Savage, ladies and gentlemen, co-host of Outkick the Tailgate.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Also, bartender extraordinary.
What are we drinking
Thank you
here?
so much.
Which one is this? Do we know? Did we get a specific?
It's the 12.
So the Weller.
The Weller 12.
Weller 12, which is a highly sought after version of one of many of their highly sought after.
Last drink I had was the Eagle Rare 17, which is also.
There you go. You got some applause.
Yes. Terrific. It's the only applause I'll get all weekend.
Yeah.
It's great. Yes.
Cheers.
Cheers to that. It's terrific.
Weller
the Weller
12 also phenomenal.
It's really good. Let's talk Florida, Georgia.
Yeah.
We're here in Jacksonville, world's largest outdoor cocktail party, not the world's largest tailgate party. Dan Mullen is a coach that I love. Love what he did at Florida as offensive coordinator. Love what he did at Mississippi State. I think he's a really good coach. His record in his last 10 to 12 games, not great against good competition and some bad competition. What do you think about where Florida is right now? Again, for those watching in 2021, not Governor Travis yet, just Clay Travis, but Florida right now and what Dan Mullen's doing.
It's a really good question.
Thank you.
The thing that would trouble me if I were a Florida Gator fan is Dan Mullen came into Florida and watched Felipe Franks and Kyle Trask practice every day and decided Felipe Franks was the better quarterback. And I understand you can make an argument, well, it's hard to know what's going to happen when the rubber meets the road and you have games that are actually underway. But if Felipe Franks doesn't break his leg against Kentucky, I'm not sure Kyle Trask ever gets in and certainly ever has the level of success that he did. And I can't speak for Florida fans, all of them, but I watch pretty much every Florida game. I watch, college football all day Saturday. I mean, I try not to miss games, and I watch everybody. And almost immediately when Kyle Trask came in, even though he's not athletic, even though he can't run, the Florida offense worked in a way it never did with Felipe Franks. Because ultimately, what matters, I think, in terms of offensive flow is knowing what a quarterback can do. Not what he might do, what he can do. And Kyle Trask was able to consistently perform and put the ball where it needed to be. Felipe Franks could throw the ball 75 yards in the air, but he also could hit a linebacker dead square in the chest on what should have been a throwaway, and it's pick six going the opposite direction. And he did that far too often. The reason why I bring that up is I think Kyle Trask papered over a lot of issues that the Florida Gators were having. And Emory is nowhere near the same level of player. I think AR-15, Anthony Richardson, has elite level talent, but he's also not been playing. So what's going on behind the scenes that Dan Mullen, who has been really successful as a quarterback whisperer, Dak, wildly successful, Nick Fitzgerald, or Fitzpatrick, I always get his name mixed up at Mississippi State, and certainly Kyle Trask. And before that, Tebow at Florida with Dan Mullen. The guy's been good with quarterbacks everywhere, but he whiffed on who should be the starter between Kyle Trask and Felipe Franks. And it feels like this year he's whiffed again in terms of the guy that would make the most difference. That makes me nervous going forward because the quarterback matters at such a level in college football. And
especially for a quarterback whisperer, like you said with Mullen.
That's what he's supposed to be. I'm not sure that the Grantham defense works, frankly. And by the way, we were recording the day before, so if Florida goes out and pulls off they're 14-point underdogs. If they were to pull off an upset against Georgia, I think lots would be recalibrated. Frankly, if Anthony Richardson comes out and plays really well the rest of this year, there'll be enough optimism, even if they go 8-4. People will say next year he's a Heisman Trophy caliber quarterback. But I'm just a little bit nervous if I'm Florida about that transition from Trask to theoretically AR-15, whether he's going to be back, and what the trajectory is of the Florida Gator program.
Florida fans here seem a little nervous about Grantham's defense also, just a little bit. Georgia, the opposite of the quarterback whisperer, is Georgia and what Kirby Smart has done, and he's done it, Clay, without a great quarterback. You had a chance to talk to Kirby Smart's wife last week in Athens and ran into her.
Yeah.
Arch Manning is the name out there. Ole Miss, Georgia, Texas, a lot of schools in the running for Arch Manning. What do you think about Georgia, what they've been able to do without a star quarterback really since Matthew Stafford, and what that could look like if Arch Manning ends up going to Georgia?
Kirby reminds me a lot of early Nick Saban. And what I mean by that is I know Jake Fromm was a pretty good quarterback, and they lost Justin Fields. But the defense led the young Alabama football dynasty until they evolved into an offensive system that fit as solidly as their defense. And if you break that down, you've had in recent history Tua, you've had Jalen Hurts, you've obviously got Bryce Young, who's playing at a high level right now, Mac Jones. We've gone from Alabama has a quarterback, nothing against him, but the Greg McElroys of the world, game managers, not necessarily putting a lot on their shoulders, to now Alabama has got elite difference makers at the quarterback position. And I think the step that Georgia has to take is from, and I think they'll get there, but from an elite defense to an elite offensive system to coexist. Right now we've got JT Daniels, who I think is okay, and we got Stetson Bennett, who I think is okay, but the fact that you don't have a solid quarterback set in stone, to me, is a testament. The early years of Saban, one of the things that was most staggering is the level of dominance he had without elite level quarterback play. And then when he added elite level quarterback play, he took everything to an entirely different level. I think that's the next step Georgia has to take.
We want to take questions also because you guys had great questions earlier. So feel free, let us hear them. Go ahead.
So my question for you would be, what's the most nostalgic moment that you had that went ahead and allowed you to go ahead and develop that passion for sports and, analytics and going ahead and, pursuing that commentary position as well?
So when I was 25 years old, I was an attorney in a law firm practicing as a litigator. And I had what I would describe as a quarter-life crisis, where I was in an office, and there's probably a lot of people out there listening right now who have had that moment where you think, oh my God, is this what I'm going to do for the rest of my life? And I realized that that wasn't for me. And we're talking about nostalgic factor. Litigation is incredibly slow-moving when you're a lawyer. So you go from law school where you're studying all these incredibly majestic and important cases and how they impact the law to basically doc review as a young lawyer, a lot of paper pushing. And it was just so boring to me. And I didn't particularly care about the outcomes of any of the cases. And so what my thought then was, I want to find something that at least is a passion of mine. And I always say, if you can find something where you don't think about the clock at all, that's what you should try to do for a living. And for me, the law profession was the worst because you think about your time in 6-minute increments, right? You're billing out all day long, literally based on your time. So you're consciously aware of how you are spending your day. And for me, writing is the only time where I'm totally not conscious of how much time passes. And so if you can lose yourself in a pursuit to such an extent that 3 hours later you look at a clock and you're like, oh my God, I can't believe it's been this long, you're probably going to be incredible at it because you're willing to put the time in to get good. And when you're doing something by looking at a clock, you're never going to be great at it. So the challenge for me was figuring out how to turn something that was a passion into something that I could make a living doing. And there are many people out there who are trying to do that on a daily basis. And that was the important pathway for me, was turning something that I loved into a way to make a living. And I managed to do that, but it took several years. But it was that recognition that I didn't have the passion to do that job for the rest of my life. I could have done it, and there's no harm in that. And sometimes people do. Certainly I understand. I've got kids. You have obligations and responsibilities, but when I made the pivot to try to take that chance, I didn't have kids. And so I didn't really have any risk factors. And so I think a lot of times people who are 22 and 23 and 24 and 25 and 26, whatever your age are, before you have kids and mortgages and obligations, I think there's a tendency to not take risk because you're afraid of failing. And I don't have the fear of failure gene. I presume that I'm going to fail a lot. And failure is not a bad thing because failure means that you've tried something that you're not capable of doing. And I think a lot of people tiptoe up to everything because they're so afraid of failure. I fail all the time, but if you don't fail, then you're really not trying to prove what you can progress. It's a good question, but that's kind of the thought processes that I've got now. I really legitimately am not afraid of losing or failing.
I feel like if you work in bourbon, like what we're here with tonight, you're probably not looking at the clock either for your job. So that's also a nice profession for that. I know you had a question also.
Yeah. So my question is, do you think Tim Tebow really got a fair shake when it comes to like him being in the NFL? I say this because I went to Nice High School my freshman year, my senior year, so I've followed him from high school level through college, and I feel like he never really got a fair shake in the NFL. Do you feel that the same way, or?
I think he would be better off playing in college football in the NFL now, in the same way that a lot of quote-unquote mobile quarterbacks would, because there's a willingness to build around you today in a way that there wouldn't have been in the past. And I'll give you an example of a player right now that's having a tremendous amount of success that a decade ago I don't think would have. Kyler Murray. I don't think anybody would have said 5'8", 5'9", Kyler Murray, I'm going to draft him #1 overall, and I'm going to build an entire offense around what he can do. I feel like there was a lot of focus in the NFL for much of the last 20 years or so on what you can't do. And figuring out what you can do and trying to build a system around you is something that I think has been an evolution in the NFL and in the thought processes of a lot of coaches. And the NFL used to think of itself as the finishing school, where football was the most advanced. And I think ironically at the quarterback position, high school and college were more laboratories that convinced the NFL of things that could work. Because you used to hear all the time for years and years, that guy's system would never work in the NFL. That guy would never work in major, NFL football. You don't hardly hear that anymore, right? Like you don't hear that much about system quarterbacks anymore.
They always talked about his throw and how it was long or something.
And so I think the Tebow is one of the 4 most impressive SEC quarterbacks that I've ever seen, right? I would put Johnny Manziel in that category at times. I would put Cam Newton. I would put Joe Burrow in his senior season in terms of what he was able to accomplish. All of those guys I would roll in as iconic, one-of-a-kind quarterbacks. Other great quarterbacks. Really, Peyton Manning was phenomenal. A guy like Green, who played like 15 years at Georgia and had a tremendous amount of success. I mean, there's lots of guys you can point to, but those 4 were guys that their offenses were so electric, and when they had the ball in their hands, you felt like they could have seasons unlike any other. I think Burrow's got the best single-season quarterback in SEC history, and I think Cam's probably second best if I had to break him down. And I think if Tebow were a decade younger, there would be somebody out there who would say, hey, I'm going to build a system around him. Having said that, he went in the first round, and he won a playoff game. And I think his influence is going to be way more substantial off the field than it was on the field. And I also give Tebow a tremendous amount of credit in that same willingness to fail. I mean, he decided to try baseball. And a lot of people are going to make fun of you and criticize that decision. He tried to play tight end for the Jags, and it didn't work out. What I respect is a willingness to make and take that opportunity as best you can.
Do you think that was an honest try when he was trying to be tight end for the Jags?
I think so. I think, and I haven't asked him about it personally, but I think there's an element when you have a talent that's that much, but also that finite. We talk about guys being old in sports all the time, and they're like 34, 35. In virtually every other profession that you would do, you would still be considered super young if you're having success at 34, 35. In pro athletics, it's like you might as well be 75 at 34, 35. I never was a great athlete, so I can't speak to it perfectly, but I think you don't want to leave anything on the court, right, on the field. For anybody out there who played high school athletics or college athletics, that game you had that was the last one you thought you were going to get to play, that moment in the locker room where you take your jersey off for the final time, potentially, of your career, if you are thoughtful enough to think about it in that moment, you want to feel like you gave it your all. And I think Tebow thought and believed that he still had enough athleticism that he didn't want to be sitting on the sideline with the ability to still compete at the highest level. And it sort of reminds me of Deontay Wilder saying, I want to go out on the shield. If you're a gladiator or you're a warrior and you're in the arena, there's I think a poetry to losing, being carried out on that shield. Wilder in the first fight against Fury was really upset at his corner for throwing in the towel because he hadn't been knocked out. And he said, I want to go out on the shield. Like, I want somebody to beat me. I want to have given every ounce of my ability as opposed to somebody trying to protect me at the end. And I respect, to a great extent, the fearlessness and the warrior mentality embodied in that idea. And I think in order to have the kind of success that somebody like Tebow has, you have to have that internal thought process that you want to give every ounce of your ability. If someone else tells you can't do it anymore, then maybe, especially in the context of the NFL, when it's Urban Meyer, it's a coach who respects and probably honors your ability more than anyone, when he's saying it, that means it probably really is the end.
Speaking of dying on the shield, Clay, can Urban Meyer recover as an NFL coach?
I think so.
From what's going on right now?
I think so. Now, it's Halloween 2 days. The best costume that I've seen is a guy dressed up like Urban Meyer in a Jags coaching costume. Did you guys see this with a hot blonde blow-up doll that he's got attached in his lap?
It was good.
So the better question maybe, can Urban recover with his wife from that video going viral? Because I think there's probably a lot of husbands that saw that video and immediately cringed thinking about what the trip home might have been after that. But if he wins, like Al Davis said it best, man, just win, baby. I mean, there are so many people out there with so much more significant stuff in their background than Urban Meyer getting grinded on by a blonde.
But here's the problem in the question. His team is breaking huddle with 1, 2, 3 grind to make fun of him. Because these are paid professionals. This is not college football anymore where, I mean, these guys are going to go out and try to perform because they're getting a paycheck, but it seems like he's already a joke to his own team.
If I were the coach, I would think that was funny. Right? I mean, the locker room.
You think Urban Meyer thinks that's funny?
No,
about Urban Meyer?
No, but I don't think Urban Meyer has a tremendous sense of self-awareness.
That's his biggest problem. That's why I asked the question.
But
can he recover?
If Trevor Lawrence is good, he'll be fine. Your coach, if you are an NFL coach, your quarterback matters more than almost any decision that you make.
Well, he's almost saved because Trevor Lawrence is such a good, nice guy. Because Trevor Lawrence, if he's good, could have his coach killed easily. Just like the star NBA player can have any coach killed, right? Not actually killed. I'm saying fired. If he doesn't like the coach, Trevor Lawrence can have him killed and probably technically killed too, if he really wanted to. I mean, if Trevor Lawrence is as good as we think, then he probably could.
I think what Urban has shown is that he tends to have really good relationships with his quarterback. Tebow seemed to really like him, and Tebow papered over a large measure of major issues at Florida. It seemed as if Urban and JT Barrett got along really, really well. And we'll see how they get along, in that context. But if Trevor Lawrence is good, Urban will be fine. If Trevor Lawrence stinks, Urban Meyer will get fired next year, at the end of next year.
Another question?
Clay, I have a question for you. So what's interesting is that I know that you're a volunteer fan. Sounds like you speak highly of Tim Tebow, which is weird being an adversary from a different team. Being a Gator fan, I have tremendous amount of respect for Bobby Bowden.
Yeah,
he was coaching at
right.
Florida State. I had a lot of friends that didn't really care for him, but I always appreciated everything he did. And even when they were beating us, I had no problems with him. What draws you to Tim Tebow being a Tennessee fan?
Well, I just appreciate excellence.
Okay.
And I appreciate fearlessness. And the older I get, the less, I wish my teams won more, but for what I do for a living, I talk about whatever the biggest sports story for years of the day was. And so you are drawn to whatever the best story is as opposed to who your team might be. And so I admire the excellence and the fearlessness of Tebow in the same way. Look, I grew up a huge Tennessee fan, but Nick Saban fascinates me. Not only because he's won championships, but because his team has dominated at a dynastic level we've never seen before in college football. Most people, it's human nature, let up when they have success. Most people win and they don't try as hard to win again. You just, the mental energy and the requirement on yourself to maintain that level of excellence is something that most people can't keep up. what and how has Nick Saban managed to do it? Those people are just fascinating to me. The same way, and again, this is crossing platforms in many ways, but Elon Musk. Elon Musk is the richest man in the world right now. He made, I think it was like $180 million on PayPal. Most people who make $180 million at the age of 27 or 28 years old, which I think he was, would say, okay, peace out. I'm going to ride off into the sunset. I'm filthy rich. I'll invest my money as I see fit. He decided to put all of that money on the line in Tesla and his solar company and his space exploration company. How many people do you know who will sit down at a poker table and put $180 million back into the center of the table and go all in on themselves, even after going up and making $180 million? That's a level of drive and competitive excellence that's almost non-existent in the country. And it's a level in the world. It's a level of fearlessness that allows you to excel in ways that almost no one else is willing to. Not can, is willing to. And so what makes those people tick, to me, is a really intriguing question. And I would bet that there is a lot of sort of internal DNA that overlaps between Elon Musk and Nick Saban.
I saw a show where Nick Saban and Bill Belichick
That was fantastic. Yeah.
Now that Tom Brady's moved on, there's always been the question of those two, which are the better coaches? Now that we've seen Tom Brady move on, if you were to gauge those two coaches, who would you say is the better of the two?
I would rather have Saban. And I would rather have Saban because Belichick and Saban coached against each other in the NFL 4 times, and Saban split with him even when Saban didn't have Tom Brady. And so one of the great near misses, I wish I could go back in time, when he was at Miami.
Oh, yeah.
Spurrier was at Washington. But if I could go back in time and make anything happen, if the Miami team doctor had signed off on Drew Brees instead of Dante Culpepper, I think there's a strong argument that Saban never leaves the NFL and wins multiple Super Bowls with the Miami Dolphin fans, with the Miami Dolphins and Drew Brees. Instead, they signed Culpepper, fail. I think they went 8-8, whatever they went, and the Bama job comes open, and Saban leaves Miami. I think that's kind of one of the big crucible moments, not only for the NFL, because if Brees goes to Miami, probably knocks several Brady Super Bowls out too, right? Because then they're competing in the AFC East. Saban wins a couple of Super Bowls there. Who knows who Alabama ends up hiring, but it's certainly not Nick Saban. And the overall trajectory of the NFL and college football is seismically different.
Bama hires another Mike Shula, and suddenly the SEC is very different.
I've got one final question. It's probably a tough question. So no matter how much success you have in life, we always have retrospect, right? If you could change any one thing in your past that you think would help you marriage-wise, family-wise, career-wise, what would you go back and change?
I wouldn't change anything.
You wouldn't change anything?
I wouldn't change a single thing that I've done in my life.
That's awesome.
Because not because I haven't made a ton of mistakes, but because I'm very happy with where I am right now. And I think if you go back, I kind of believe in the butterfly effect. If you go back and change one failure, then your risk that you take going forward would be different. Now, I'm fortunate, things that you don't have any control over right now. My kids are happy and healthy, right? It would be an easy answer to give if I had something like that, if my parents or my wife or somebody who's close to me had a health condition or something, and like those kind of things where you didn't catch it in time. So far, we have not had any issues like those, but in terms of individual choices that I have made that I could change, I wouldn't change a single thing in my life.
Great answer.
This is also a lie because I know he'd change his pants decision.
No,
he lost so much money in pants that he would change that.
I lost $50,000 in pants, right? I've lost.
Back when $50,000 was a lot of money to you.
It's a lot of money. But I learned a lot about business by losing the $50,000 in pants. So I don't know that I would have had the success in other parts of my business if I hadn't lost the 50. So,
So it's almost like those losses.
Yes, failure is temporary, right? If you believe that you are making mostly good decisions over the course of your life patterns, then the downsides that you have are eventually going to turn into victories. You know, we did a long-form podcast called Wins and Losses, where I've done long conversations with a lot of people. We have a tendency to only focus on the wins. Right? When I sold my company, everybody's like, "Oh, you're amazing! Like, oh, it's so great, and I've got money, and like, that's all great." But the end result is not the interesting story. The interesting story is, to me, you know, when I wrote my first book, Dixieland Delight, I had a book signing in Birmingham, Alabama, that I drove to, and nobody came. Right? 2 hours in a bookstore, Books A Million, Birmingham, Alabama. Not one person came. You're sitting at a table with your books. It's a picture of you right there. And you know, at the time I was 26, 27 years old. Feel good about yourself because you publish a book, and you sit there for 2 hours and nobody comes through. Now, one thing I do is anytime I see an author selling a book, I buy a book. That's advice that I would give anybody out there, because when you write a book, you pour your heart and soul into whatever that book is, right? There's not really anything else you do, hardly, where you sit in front of a blank computer screen and you're responsible for creating something out of nothing. There's very few things like that. And so there's a tremendous amount of yourself that is poured into a book, for instance. Almost every comedian I've ever spoken to, every musician, anyone who has a public-facing life has been in one of those events where they went to go try to do a comedy show and nobody showed up. Dave Chappelle is the most successful comedian in the world right now, probably. And his special I enjoyed on Netflix recently, and obviously I'm an artistic freedom guy. But I guarantee if Dave Chappelle was here right now, he would be able to tell you, if I asked him, hey, what's the worst gig you ever had in your comedy career? He'd be able to go to a moment like that. Every musician can go to a moment like that. And so that is, in theory, a tremendous failure, but it's temporary. And when you can recognize in that moment, man, this is embarrassing, this is uncomfortable, I wish it wasn't happening, but it's gonna end. And I'm going to be in a position where this doesn't happen again. I've just gotta keep getting better. Most people, I think, when they're faced with a situation like that, they find it so crushing that they try to avoid ever being in a situation like that again. And if you do that, then you aren't able to ever take the proverbial next steps to get you to a better position.
So what did you do to avoid that the next time?
I think you show up and you grind every day. You know, I mean, you can't be afraid of that happening. And you know, I was 26 or 27. I think that, I don't know, you know, we talked about 35, 36 years old as an athlete, you peak.
Did it motivate you?
I wouldn't say necessarily that it motivated me, but it didn't convince me not to do it, right? And so I think it is somewhat motivating. There's always, like, in the back of your mind, the idea that this could end. One reason why I rarely say no is I think you have the idea that, you know, time is transitory and success can be transitory, but all you can control is your own work ethic. And I work really hard. And it seems to me that lots of people, and what I've tried to do, and I'm not perfect at this, but I try to teach my kids this too, most people, when something happens that isn't good, look for a reason outside of themselves why it wasn't good, right?
Locus of control.
But all you can control is yourself. And so if I can say legitimately every day I did everything that I could, then I think the overall culture tends to be better than somebody sitting around and saying, you fucking suck. Why are you so bad at what you did? And so I try to not rely on an external source for a reason that you lost. Like my son, my 11-year-old came to me yesterday, and he said, Dad, did you see the umpire study of game 1 and game 2 in Houston? And I said, no. He said, 19 of the 20 questionable calls went in favor of the Astros. I said, oh, that's interesting. I said, you know what you can do about that? He said, no. I said, nothing. you can't control the mistakes that somebody else outside of you makes. What you can do is be so excellent yourself that the game's not close and that an individual official's decision doesn't determine it. So I'm big on control what you can control, and I think a lot of people focus on other people as opposed to controlling what they can control. The challenge that the UFC has is they don't get to control their narratives. In the same way, like we're big WWE fans in my family.
Okay.
If they have a great storyline, they can guarantee that their guy or girl doesn't lose, and they build it up to the perfect fight.
That's
In the UFC, they're always trying to set it up for this fight and then the next fight, and then the guy they want to fight gets his ass kicked, and they can't have the next fight, right?
Yep.
So I think the challenge that they've got is that you're getting at, they have to build artificial narratives
Correct.
to convince people to buy in.
Correct.
You know, and the Ronda Rouseys or the Conor McGregors of the world, when they feel like they're going to take that next step and everybody cares about one of their fights,
Yep.
they get their ass kicked,
Yep.
and you aren't able to, and the person who beats their ass doesn't attain their level of fame, right?
correct.
So like Holly Holm, I think it was,
Yep, Holly
beats
Holm.
Ronda Rousey.
Yep.
Everybody cared about Ronda Rousey
Yep.
at that time. She was an iconic figure. And in boxing, it seems like it translates a little bit better, right? You know, like so back in the day when Mike Tyson gets knocked out by Buster Douglas,
Yep.
Buster Douglas becomes a really fascinating guy. When Ruiz beat Anthony Joshua, Ruiz became really kind of interesting. It doesn't translate, I don't think, the same way in the UFC. And I think that's one of the challenges that you're getting at is their business model is predicated on stars, and sometimes the stars get their ass kicked and they don't have a star to sell, so they have to create new narratives.
That's the truth.
How do you feel about the leadership? Because I just feel like that as a Jaguar fan and a local resident, I don't think the team's gonna grow until the city grows.
I think it's a fantastic question. And I think one of the big challenges that you run into is business, they have to make decisions. And if you don't make the decision in the right time, the business opportunity is gone. And so businessmen think differently than politicians. Politicians, their jobs exist no matter what, right? It's not like the mayor of Jacksonville job is suddenly not going to exist. If you're running a business and you do a shitty job, it goes bankrupt and doesn't exist anymore. And so I think it's about stakes. I trust business leaders personally more than I do politicians, because politicians are often about propagating their power as opposed to creating something new. I think a lot of times in metaphor, but you know, there's a difference between a guy who looks at a pie and says there's 6 pieces, and then everybody just fights over those 6 pieces. I think politicians oftentimes think of pies as they exist. Business people think about building bigger pies, right? And getting a person who sees a small pie to think about how to build a bigger one is often really complicated, and I think that's the conflict between business and politics, because politics is like, no, we've got 6 pieces, and the church gets this, and the black community gets this, and the schools get this, and you know, the suburbs get this, and all these different things. Like, you're trying to analyze it, but you're not trying to grow the pie, and you end up fighting all in the middle of that community, right? And then you got a business person who say, wait a minute, you know, business is about creativity. It's about seeing an opportunity for something to exist that didn't exist before and taking advantage of it. And I think what happens so often with business people is, and I think about this because I like business, politics, creativity, all this. I feel like I can kind of see across the lines a little bit. The political people are trying to protect what already exists, and the business people are trying to create things that don't exist yet. And that conflict between the two can be so frustrating. It goes a little bit to my point earlier about being a lawyer. Litigators often are dealing about what is as opposed to what could be. And it's fighting over what was. It's not even what is. It's like, you know, 10 years ago somebody said this and I'm going to fight over it. I don't have time for it, right? I'm worried about what's going to come next as opposed to what happened a long time ago. And I think business people are thinking about next and politicians are thinking about now. And I think that's often a major disconnect. You know, Elon Musk says the reason why he's had success is because he thinks 10 years in the future. There's a lot of people who think 6 months in the future. There's a lot of people who think a year into the future. If you can think 10 years into the future, you're probably going to dominate because people aren't thinking about competing with you out there. They're thinking about competing with you right now. Everybody's trying to get 10% better. Nobody's trying to change the game. And the best business leaders are trying to change the game. And based on what I know about Shad Khan and what he's created for himself and what he's built, he's one of the best businessmen in the history of the United States, right? I mean, that's not an exaggeration. He started with nothing, has built an incredible opportunity for himself. And I think that's the challenge. Wither, you got one to close us out?
We've been going on this tour, throughout football season, and here we are with our Outkick Bourbon Tour, poured by Buffalo Trace. You've always said Twitter's not real life.
Yeah.
Social media is not real life. What have you found as we've gone through these SEC schools, we've been at events, that's actual life versus social media life?
Well, first of all, this is always a fun trick, but I haven't been on social media in like 4 hours, okay? So, but people, they constantly chirp, right? I mean, they're constantly sending things. So one of the things I talk to my kids about, and I talk to younger people about, is you guys are so involved in your phones that you don't see what's going on in the world around you, right? And I know it's seductive, but what you're constantly doing is allowing people who don't know you to define you in your own head, right? It's important to think about. And I think this is one of the challenges that kids have. And I'm glad I'm the age that I am. I'm 42, young enough to understand social media, but old enough to have not grown up with it myself. And I think that's an important, so my self-worth or my self-analysis doesn't get defined by what people say about me on my phone. And I think there are a lot of people who don't have that perspective. But I can go in here in the last 10 minutes, and I won't do it right now just because I don't want to have to go through my phone. But the number of people who are telling me that I'm the worst human being that's ever existed, literally in the last 5 minutes, would be substantial, right? And so I think
I was hoping you're going to read the worst tweet you received in the last hour.
Well,
really hoping you're going to find one.
I need somebody else to be in charge of my mention and just scroll through and have it for me, so I don't have to just sit here and read 7 or 8 or 10 in a row. But the bigger picture point here is we are in danger, I believe. We've basically just tossed this brand new technology directly into the country without understanding what its impact is. And then we've allowed this, which I refer to social media, and I think it's the right metaphor, as a carnival funhouse mirror. And the reason why I use that analogy is if you tried to adjust your eating habits based on the carnival funhouse mirror, which makes you look fatter or skinnier or taller or shorter than you actually are, you would actually make whatever body you have worse by taking it as a guide. And so what I try to do is use that as a megaphone to spread my ideas, but simultaneously keep my head up so that I'm aware of what's going on in the larger world outside of my phone. And the analogy I always use too is we've been everywhere. Bars, restaurants, like everywhere you can possibly imagine, big crowds. I've probably had COVID 15 times by now. I shake so many hands, and bourbon does help. I shake so many hands, and I pose for so many pictures, and I'm in close proximity with so many different people. No one's ever said a negative word to me, face to face. But the number of people who have said, if I ever see you out in public, I'm going to beat your ass, like you. And so, Well, what I'm getting at is, I think it's mostly bullshit. And I think when we allow this, meaning just the phone, to dictate human interaction, it fails. Because most people, if they're face-to-face, are going to find things that they agree on more frequently than they disagree. And I am, old school in this sense, and that I genuinely, truly do believe white, black, brown, Asian, Hispanic, whatever color we are, or whatever race we are, whatever sexuality we are, we all have way more in common than we do different. And what has happened is, with identity politics and cancel culture, everyone is constantly at each other's throats, and there's this idea that we have a lot less in common. And so I think that's why I think sports is so important, right? And I've been making this analogy for a long time. When you are in a arena, when you are in a stadium, when your team wins, You don't think about the race, religion, the ethnicity, the sexuality of anybody else inside of that stadium. You're all Florida Gators or Georgia Bulldogs or whatever that particular fan base is. And that's why I think sports can be such an important part of the fabric of the country. You know, I am always, and I've always been of the opinion that what you don't choose about yourself is far less interesting than the choices you make about yourself, right? We can't choose how tall we are. We can't choose how good looking we are. We can't choose what race we are, any of those things. But the things that we choose are so much more interesting than the identities that people presume represent us on a day-to-day basis. And by the way, I think about that because, yes, I'm a Southern white guy, but I went away to college different places. People presume because I'm a Southern white guy that I'm stupid, right? When I went away to college in D.C. on the East Coast, people were like, oh, you're from Nashville, you're from Tennessee, you're a backwoods, ignorant redneck. That may be true. Some people would say that I'm a backwoods, ignorant redneck. But judging me based on where I was from, to me, was a fundamentally unfair, but also boring, right, way to analyze me. And so I think about that all the time now in the context of social media, where all you have is an avatar photo and maybe 25 words to describe yourself or whatever the heck it is, and people just decide, oh, you believe X because you are Y, when the reality is probably not really the case. And I say on my radio show all the time that I don't really think, even though sometimes it gets people riled up, but I don't really think about things very often in terms of Democrat, Republican, Independent, or whatever. I think about sane versus insane. And there's a lot of insane ideas out there. And so I think there's a desperate demand for authenticity and sanity, and I try to be an authentic, insane person in an often inauthentic and insane world.
Clay, you're close to my age, so let me ask you a question. Do you think it's because of our age? So I'm 43.
Yeah.
I'm going to be 44. Do you think it's because we came in at that beginning of the technology boom, that late 30s, early 40s, get both sides? The older side of this is how it's always been, the younger side of the technology. Do you think that 35 to 45 really kind of gets?
Yeah, I really do think it's a sweet spot, because I think, like I said, you're young enough to understand social media,
Right.
but old enough to understand that it's bullshit. I think about it because I've got 3 kids, 13, 11, and 7. And I'm trying to keep them mostly off of social media. And I think about when I was a kid, if I got home, let's say I'm 15 years old and there's some girl I want to talk to, the most extensive technology we had in my house, we didn't have a computer, was we got call waiting. It was like call waiting was amazing because my sister, if she's on the phone and I want to talk to somebody, like they can get through. Yeah. And then we had, *69, so you could see who called before. But I think about it because what I mean by it is you could escape and define yourself outside of what you were doing at school on a daily basis. And if you were talking to a friend, you were probably talking to one friend at a time, either face-to-face or on a phone. When I see the kids now with Snapchat and all of the different Instagram and everything else, they're selling artificial versions of their world all day long, and you can't escape the idea that you're on stage every minute of every day. It used to be only celebrities were on stage, but it's like, hey, look at this amazing thing that I did. Look at this amazing opportunity that I had and everything else. And I think for many people out there, it's like, well, I don't look that good in that bikini. Well, I didn't get to go to that event. There is a constant awareness of what you don't have as opposed to what you do have, if that makes sense. And I think social media exacerbates that discomfort, and I think it's why there's such a profound unhappiness in so many people in the richest country that has ever existed in the history of the world. There's still so many people that feel very empty.
This has been great. Thank you guys so much. Really good questions throughout. Appreciate it. I would read one of the mentions to Clay, but my eyes went cross from all the vaccination stats that were being just sent back to Clay over and over that I can't even, I'm not good with math, so I can't do it. Thank you so much. Thanks to Buffalo Trace. This is
By the way,
stop
let me
one.
just say that, yeah. Buffalo Trace is phenomenal, and I think you guys know, authenticity, I believe, is probably the most important attribute that exists in our society today, because we live in a time of profound inauthenticity. And There is something that is very fulfilling about just being able to sit and have a drink that's been authentically aged for as long as it has. It's been waiting for the experience, and I think this is the opposite of being on your phone. It's being in the moment and enjoying the seconds and the taste and all the profundity. So thank you to Buffalo Trace.
Cheers to that.
Thank you,
Yes.
Trace.
Yeah.
Drink all mine.